The cosmos has always been a tapestry of energy, woven together by threads both seen and unseen. The Force bound every particle, every life form, and every star, shaping destinies across millennia. But some threads did not belong. Some were frayed, ripped from another reality entirely. And in one such tier, Thor, the god of thunder, hurtled through the void between worlds. His Asgardian senses screamed in confusion as the laws of physics bent differently, unfamiliar energies caressing his skin in patterns he could not yet name. Mjolnir's grip was solid in his hand, yet it pulsed with an alien resonance, a whisper of the Force that beckoned him, even as it resisted his command. Thor landed hard on a barren moon orbiting a gas giant. Dust clouds swirled with the faint hum of hyperdrive fallout, and strange metallic constructs scattered across the gray plains. Stars that he had always read as familiar now twinkled with frequencies that sang differently to his senses. His arrival had gone unnoticed by local sensors at first, but the Force, a living, conscious presence here, detected him immediately. Not as a Jedi, not as a Sith, but as something entirely new. The energy Mjolnir had drawn from Asgardian storms now vibrated in tandem with these alien currents, and for the first time, Thor realized that his powers might not function as they had back home. Despite the unfamiliarity, Thor's confidence was unshakable. He had fought gods, monsters, and cosmic horrors across countless realms, and the galaxy before him was merely another battlefield, though one with rules he had yet to learn. A sudden flash in the sky drew his attention. A rebel starship, sleek and battered from previous skirmishes, streaked past the gas giant's shadow, pursued by Imperial TIE fighters. The cries of sirens, the vibration of engines, and the smell of ozone in the vacuum-adjacent atmosphere were foreign but exhilarating. Thor clenched Mjolnir, summoning a bolt of lightning to arc into the sky. The Force recoiled at his power, a reaction he could feel through every nerve. He had no idea whether it was compatible with this universe's physics, yet instinct told him that intervention might be necessary. The Imperial fighters, sensing the unexpected energy discharge, turned their attention to the source. Thor laughed, a booming, thunderous sound that resonated across the barren moonscape. Mjolnir's flight through the air was a dance of chaos and precision. Each strike of lightning immobilized a fighter or sent it spiraling off course, and for the first time, Thor understood something of the Force. It was less a weapon and more a conduit, an amplifier of intent. Yet the difference was profound. Here, raw strength alone could not guarantee victory. Finesse, timing, and alignment with these new energies mattered. Moments later, a small rebel craft descended, evading the TIE fighters and skimming across the moon's jagged surface. Its captain, a wiry Twi'lek named Kayla, peered through the cockpit viewfinder in disbelief. "One in the outer rim," she muttered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. She was trained to react to danger, to enemies wielding blasters and starfighters, not gods of thunder from another dimension. The god of thunder himself had no intent to harm her, yet his presence was enough to make her entire squadron reconsider their tactics. Thor's first words to them were simple, but heavily accented by the grandeur of his Asgardian heritage. "I am Thor, son of Odin. I seek knowledge of this energy that courses through this world. I mean no harm unless harm comes to me first." His booming voice carried the weight of authority, yet his eyes betrayed curiosity, a desire to understand, to master the Force, as one might wield Mjolnir. Kayla, sensing his sincerity yet unsure of his power, gestured to her co-pilot. "We need to get back to the rebel base. There's something about him." Her instinct told her that Thor was not merely another weapon or mercenary. He was a force of nature, untamed and dangerous, yet potentially a valuable ally. She made the split-second decision to escort him, knowing full well that Imperial forces would respond to any lingering anomaly with lethal precision. Thor's walk through the dense corridors of the rebel base was unlike any battlefield he had encountered. The smells of recycled air, fuel, and machine oil combined with a quiet hum of energy fields created a sensory overload. Rebel officers and soldiers whispered in awe and fear as he passed. Every corner he turned, every console he examined, spoke of a civilization fighting against overwhelming odds, yet doing so with ingenuity and resolve rather than divine might. Thor could respect that, though he also recognized that they underestimated the scale of the universe he came from. The rebel leaders, including Mon Mothma herself, convened to determine the nature of this Asgardian interloper. "We cannot dismiss him," one officer said, "and yet we cannot risk trusting him either." Thor, ever impatient, lifted Mjolnir and allowed a minor display of power, a controlled bolt of lightning arcing into the ceiling. No one was harmed, but the demonstration silenced the council immediately. He did not perform it to intimidate. Rather, he sought to communicate through action. "I am here to learn the ways of this force," he declared. "Show me its paths, or I shall find my own. Know that I act with honor, but I will not be bound by ignorance." The council debated long into the evening, balancing fear with fascination. Jedi scouts, sent to assess Thor's abilities, returned with reports of a being whose mastery of storm, strength, and dimensional energy dwarfed anything the Order had seen. Yoda's words, sent via hologram, echoed in Thor's mind. "Power you have, but patience, control, understand the currents you must. Teach we can. Resist perhaps you will." The tone was neither judgmental nor inviting. It was a cautious acknowledgement that Thor's arrival was unprecedented, and that the consequences of his involvement in galactic affairs could be catastrophic or transformative. Thor himself took this as a challenge. Alone in the observation chamber, he allowed Mjolnir to float before him, its hammerhead glowing faintly with a mixture of Asgardian energy and an unidentifiable force resonance. He struck it into the floor, sending a shock wave through the chamber. Every vibration, every pulse of energy, taught him something new about the fabric of this galaxy. The Force, he realized, was alive not just in beings, but in objects, structures, even the air itself. And if he could learn to harmonize Mjolnir's storms with these currents, he might become more than a god of one universe. He could become a bridge between dimensions, a living embodiment of raw power guided by discipline. Yet the galaxy was not waiting. Imperial communications intercepted the unusual energy fluctuations and the sudden appearances of starships behaving unpredictably. Darth Vader, aboard the Executor, felt the tremor in the Force, a surge unlike any Sith or Jedi had experienced. It was not merely power, it was audacity, chaos, and purpose all at once. Vader's eyes narrowed behind his mask. "This one is dangerous, not in the ways of the Force alone, but in ways we cannot yet comprehend." The confrontation, though not immediate, was inevitable. Every decision Thor made, every strike of Mjolnir, every bolt of lightning, every attempt to attune to the Force, rippled across the galaxy. Kayla and her team guided him carefully through rebel operations, yet Thor's personality, irrepressible and heroic, often clashed with protocol. Orders were suggestions, plans were mere guidelines, and yet results, spectacular, devastating, and precise, often vindicated his actions. It was a style the rebels had never seen. Raw, godlike power tempered by curiosity, honor, and an uncanny understanding of physics and energy. By nightfall, Thor stood atop the rebel base's main tower, looking out at the stars, Mjolnir at his side, lightning crackling faintly from its runes. He sensed the coming storm, not just the literal storm of his lightning, but the metaphorical storm of galactic conflict. Imperial fleets would respond. Sith would probe the boundaries of his abilities. And somewhere in the shadows, perhaps the Jedi would offer guidance, or perhaps a challenge. For now, he was a god among mortals, yet the Force whispered that his journey was only beginning. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, Thor's voice boomed over the base's comm systems. Hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. And with that, Thor turned his gaze to the distant horizon, ready to step fully into the ways of the Force, unaware that every choice he made would set the course for wars, alliances, and challenges beyond imagination. The God of Thunder had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. The hum of the rebel base settled into a tense rhythm, a fragile heartbeat of defiance against the vast machinery of the Empire. Thor walked through the corridors, Mjolnir suspended beside him, its aura pulsing faintly as though aware of the subtle threads of the Force that wove through the very walls. Every rebel soldier he passed whispered in awe, some crossing themselves, others instinctively reaching for their blasters. For Thor, it was both familiar and strange. Admiration tempered by fear, a reaction he had inspired countless times in Asgard, but never in a galaxy that spoke a language of energy instead of gods. Kayla guided him toward a secure hangar bay, where a squad of Jedi had arrived under emergency orders. Master Vandar, a seasoned human Jedi known for his calm demeanor and precise mastery of lightsaber forms, stepped forward, his green blade illuminating the dimly lit hangar. The air was thick with anticipation, the hum of lightsabers meeting the crackle of residual energy from Thor's earlier lightning display. "You are unlike anything we have encountered," Vandar said, keeping his tone measured. His eyes, however, betrayed his concern. The Force flared around Thor like a storm, unpredictable and powerful. "Are you a Force sensitive or something else entirely?" Thor's booming laugh filled the space. "I am Thor, son of Odin. I wield Mjolnir, the storm's fury, and yet I sense something in this galaxy that resonates with my power. You call it the Force. I call it a path I intend to master." He lifted Mjolnir with ease, allowing a small bolt of lightning to arc toward a distant pillar, causing the metal to twist, but remain unbroken. "Your techniques, your discipline, intriguing. But I have faced gods in my own realm, Jedi. Show me these ways, and I shall see if I can learn to harmonize them with my own power." Vandar exchanged a glance with his fellow Jedi. The Council had sent them to assess Thor's potential, and while they were trained to meet new threats with open minds, this was unprecedented. A being of raw energy, capable of feats beyond mortal comprehension, yet seemingly intent on learning rather than destroying. This was a rare anomaly. "You will train with us," Vandar said finally, his voice firm. "But know this, the Force demands respect. Power without control is a path to darkness, regardless of intent." Training began that very night. Thor's Asgardian reflexes, honed from millennia of combat, gave him a distinct advantage. Every maneuver, every swing of Mjolnir, every controlled release of lightning was analyzed and reflected back through the Force. Unlike his homeworld, where brute strength often sufficed, the Force required finesse, timing, and an understanding of energy flows that even Thor had never considered. He struck at training dummies with controlled power, feeling the resistance, noting the fluctuations in the Force as his strikes connected. It was a dance, not a duel, a harmony, not a battle. Yet his progress was not without consequence. Thor's raw energy occasionally disrupted the Force around him. Small tremors shook the hangar, lights flickered, and a droid monitoring the simulations short-circuited from the residual storm energy. "Control, Thor," Vandar reminded him gently, though his eyes reflected the awe of witnessing a being capable of reshaping the physical laws of the galaxy itself. "The Force flows like a river. You cannot force it, you must channel it." Outside the rebel base, Imperial sensors had detected the unusual energy signatures emanating from the moon. Darth Vader, aboard the Executor, had been informed of a foreign presence of staggering power. "A disturbance unlike any Force-sensitive," Vader murmured, his breathing echoing through the chamber. "Not Jedi, not Sith, something else. The Emperor must be made aware. Send probes, and I will see this being for myself." The decision was made swiftly. Thor would not remain a curiosity for long. The galaxy's most feared enforcer would personally investigate this anomaly. Back within the rebel base, Thor's interactions with the Jedi were already causing philosophical ripples. He questioned their rules, their doctrines, their insistence on detachment. "You speak of balance and peace," he said one evening as they meditated, "yet you wield a power that can destroy worlds. And you forbid yourselves the very expression of your strength in battle." Vandar, meditating beside him, responded with patience. "Strength must be guided, Thor. Without guidance, it is chaos. You have the power of gods, but even gods must choose their path." Thor's curiosity led him further. He explored ancient holocrons, artifacts of immense knowledge, sensing resonances of power similar yet foreign to Mjolnir. He learned of kyber crystals, the way the Force could flow through these conduits to create weapons of precision and intent. He experimented, combining his lightning with the crystal energies in controlled bursts. Small sparks danced across the room, illuminating his face with a mixture of triumph and caution. It was not mastery, yet he was learning, adapting, melding Asgardian might with Force discipline in a way no Jedi had ever witnessed. During these sessions, Thor also observed the rebel strategies. Guerrilla tactics, stealth operations, the prioritization of intelligence over brute force. It was alien to his Asgardian mindset, where strength often solved problems. Yet he began to see merit in subtlety, in timing, in the art of patience. Kayla noticed these changes. "You're not just learning their ways," she said quietly. "You're improving them, making them more effective." Thor's grin, broad and unapologetic, was enough of a response. The galaxy fights with cleverness and courage. I add thunder. But the Empire would not remain idle. Imperial probes, small craft designed to monitor and neutralize anomalies, approached the moon. Thor, sensing the intrusion, met them in the vacuum of space. Mjolnir cut through the void, arcs of lightning tearing across the hulls of TIE fighters. Blasters bounced off shields, hulls twisted under the energy, and yet Thor remained meticulous. He aimed not to destroy indiscriminately, but to incapacitate. "Precision, control, adaptation," he muttered, echoing the lessons of Vandar and the Jedi. Each strike was a study in harmonizing raw strength with the currents of the Force that he now partially understood. Vandar watched from the rebel base, nodding slightly. He learns fast, perhaps too fast. His power is immense, but the heart must be tested. How will he act when faced with true moral choice? When the galaxy demands decisions beyond combat? That question loomed larger than any physical threat. The Jedi understood that raw power without moral clarity was dangerous, yet Thor's ethics, born of Asgardian nobility, offered promise. Still, they wondered if the alien god could restrain himself when faced with the corrupting influence of the dark side, or when confronted with the consequences of his own godlike might. That test arrived sooner than anticipated. A distress signal came from a nearby outpost, occupied by innocents under Imperial occupation. Rebels debated intervention, weighing risks against resources. Thor's decision was immediate. "We go," he declared, grabbing Mjolnir. "They face oppression, and I will not allow it. Not here, not anywhere." Kayla's team scrambled to prepare ships, the Jedi providing coordination, yet it was Thor who led the charge, understanding instinctively that his arrival could tip the scales. As they approached the outpost, Thor felt the Force intensify around him, sensing fear, hope, desperation, and cruelty all in a chaotic web. It was different from any battlefield he had known, where the stakes were often personal or regional. Here, the consequences were moral as well as tactical. He guided the squad, combining aerial strikes with precision blasts of lightning, dismantling Imperial machinery without causing unnecessary harm to civilians. Rebels who had fought for years in stealth operations marveled at his capability. It was as though a living weapon of divine judgment had joined their ranks, yet wielded with intentional restraint. By the time they landed and confronted the occupying Imperial forces, Thor's understanding of the Force had deepened further. His strikes with Mjolnir were not purely physical. He channeled energy to anticipate enemy movements, to redirect attacks, to shield innocents. It was an intuitive dance with the currents of the Force, something no Jedi or Sith could have taught in mere hours. Imperial soldiers were overwhelmed not just by power, but by the efficiency and morality guiding it. The battle ended swiftly, with Thor ensuring that all prisoners were freed and Imperial casualties minimized through tactical mastery. Yet in the aftermath, he felt the first real weight of consequence in this galaxy. Power, he realized, demanded responsibility, not merely the responsibility to act, but the responsibility to consider the ripple of every action. His presence was not only a boon, it was a disruptive force, one that could tip the delicate balance of galactic politics if left unchecked. As night fell on the outpost, Thor stood atop a crumbling wall, Mjolnir by his side, and looked at the stars. He was beginning to understand the Force, but more importantly, he was beginning to understand himself in relation to this galaxy. His powers were immense, yes, but the moral and strategic landscapes were far more complex than any battle he had fought in Asgard or beyond. He knew the Empire would respond, that the dark side would seek him, and that every ally and enemy would be forced to reckon with the arrival of a god in their midst. Kayla approached quietly. "You're learning fast," she said, almost in awe, "but faster than anyone can prepare for. Do you think the Empire will understand that you're not just a weapon?" Thor's gaze, intense and steady, met hers. "They will learn in time. And if they do not, I will ensure that they understand. Not through cruelty, but through action. Justice, tempered by power, is the path I choose." And as the twin moons of the barren world rose into the sky, Thor's silhouette, thunder at his command, and nascent mastery of the Force became a symbol of hope and a warning. For the Empire, for the rebels, and for the Jedi, the God of Thunder was no mere visitor. He was a force unto himself, a collision of worlds that would reshape destinies and challenge every assumption about power, morality, and the nature of the Force. The Empire never ignored anomalies for long, especially when one carried the unmistakable pulse of raw, nearly divine energy. Darth Vader had already dispatched a contingent of Inquisitors to investigate the strange readings emanating from the moon, where Thor had aligned with the rebel forces. But even the dark enforcers of the Emperor were unprepared for what they would face. Thor was no mere force-sensitive. He was a storm incarnate, a god in form and will, learning to bend the currents of the Force to his advantage. As the Inquisitors approached in sleek, black fighters, Thor's premonition of their presence came not from his eyes, but from the subtle tendrils of the Force that whispered warnings. His grip on Mjolnir tightened, the weapon resonating with both his innate power and the newly tapped potential of the Force. He could feel every heartbeat, every hesitation, every flicker of fear within the approaching ships. The first wave of energy blasts approached, and Thor, moving faster than even the Inquisitors anticipated, sent arcs of lightning crackling through space, disintegrating two craft before the rest could react. Within the hangar of the rebel base, alarm screamed. Kayla shouted orders, coordinating fighters to intercept surviving Imperial vessels, while Thor's display outside drew awe and terror in equal measure. "He's manipulating the Force," one pilot gasped. "And lightning." Another soldier swore, muttering that the man, or God, was rewriting the rules of warfare itself. Thor's presence was both boon and hazard. Even the rebels had to adapt quickly to the unpredictable rhythm of his attacks. Thor landed in the midst of the ensuing battle, boots striking the ground with kinetic force that made the metal beneath him shudder. The Inquisitors, cloaked in black, ignited their lightsabers with a hum that reverberated in the air, their blades casting an eerie glow against the smoke-filled backdrop. Vader himself had arrived in orbit, observing, calculating. He understood the threat immediately. Thor was not only powerful, but adaptive, merging foreign power with the Force in ways no Sith or Jedi had yet envisioned. The first Inquisitor lunged at Thor with aggressive precision, sabers spinning in a deadly arc. Thor, anticipating through the Force, twisted his body mid-air and countered with Mjolnir. The impact sent energy cascading through the hangar, shields flickering under the combined Force lightning discharge. Thor's understanding of combat was not limited to brute strength. He read the currents, predicting attacks and redirecting them with uncanny accuracy. The Force did not flow around him as a separate current. It coursed with him, a symphony of power he was learning to conduct with each movement. Kayla coordinated rebel forces from above, using the chaos to mount a counteroffensive. X-Wings swooped low, targeting TIE fighters that tried to flank the Inquisitors, while Thor remained the fulcrum of the battlefield, his every strike a lesson in power married with discipline. Yet even in this chaotic victory, he was learning the subtler lessons of the Force. restrained patience, and the understanding that overwhelming power alone could not secure lasting peace. Civilians were nearby, and Thor consciously moderated his lightning, careful to channel it precisely. One strike misdirected could kill innocence, and for the first time, he felt the heavy weight of moral responsibility unlike anything in his past battles against frost giants or dark deities. Vader, observing, finally descended to the moon's surface. His shuttle pierced the atmosphere with dark majesty, the Imperial ensign casting a shadow over the combat. Thor sensed him immediately, a ripple of the dark side brushing against his own energy. The thrill of challenge surged through him. This was a worthy opponent, not a mindless drone. And yet, there was a gnawing realization. Vader's mastery of the Force was deep, precise, and lethal. Any engagement would test both his physical and moral limits. Their first confrontation was inevitable. Vader ignited his lightsaber as he stepped into the battlefield, every movement calculated, every step a study in intimidation. Thor met him, Mjolnir in hand, channeling a controlled storm of energy that intertwined with the Force around him. The first exchange was a shockwave of sound and light, sabers clashing against Mjolnir's mystic metal, the Force itself bending around the duel in ways the moon had never known. Vader struck with relentless precision, anticipating Thor's lightning, deflecting it, turning it into kinetic ripples that Thor had to counter instantly. Thor realized that power alone would not suffice. He needed strategy, creativity, and the full understanding of the Force's flow. Using a combination of Force-enhanced agility and lightning-fused strikes, he began testing Vader's defenses. Every clash sparked mini explosions of energy, lighting up the hangar with a chaotic beauty. Thor's laughter, booming yet focused, echoed across the battlefield. "Come now, Vader. Show me if the dark side is worthy of its reputation." The Inquisitors and surviving Imperial forces watched, torn between awe and fear. Thor was no longer simply an ally of the rebels. He had become the fulcrum of conflict, a being who could decide the outcome of battles with both raw might and careful Force manipulation. His adaptation was remarkable. Within mere hours, he had begun to anticipate movements before they were fully executed, subtly influencing probability and using the Force to enhance his combat reflexes. Vader, despite his mastery, noted this with a rare flicker of concern. Thor was learning, adapting, and growing more formidable with every exchange. Yet the moral test came next. The battle moved into a civilian sector, where innocents were trapped under collapsed buildings and fire. Vader, ruthless and calculating, directed his forces to advance, seeking to draw Thor into a trap that would maximize casualties for tactical advantage. Thor, sensing the suffering, made a decision that would define his role in this galaxy. He withdrew momentarily, using the Force to lift debris, shield civilians, and redirect energy blasts with perfect timing. He did not yield out of fear, but out of choice, channeling godlike power to protect rather than dominate. The Inquisitors' attacks were slowed, frustrated by the unexpected morality-driven strategy. The duel between Thor and Vader intensified, now a complex interplay of ethics, raw power, and strategy. Each strike Thor delivered was precise, aimed to disable rather than kill. He tested Vader, gauged his reflexes, and began combining Force pushes with lightning to disarm and disable. It was a dance, a study in restraint and dominance, showing the galaxy that the Force could be wielded without cruelty. Thor was no mere weapon. He was a moral agent, and his actions left ripples in the Force that even the Jedi could feel. At the same time, the rebel forces, emboldened by Thor's presence, began to reclaim sections of the base. His intervention inspired them, shifted morale, and altered the perception of the battle. Kayla observed this transformation with quiet amazement. "He's more than a fighter," she murmured to herself. "He's a symbol, a storm with a purpose." Indeed, the mythos of a god in the Star Wars galaxy began to solidify in real time. Ultimately, the confrontation reached a stalemate. Vader, recognizing Thor's formidable skill and understanding of the Force, withdrew with the Inquisitors. His retreat was strategic, a temporary measure, knowing that he would report the anomaly to the Emperor. Thor, standing amidst the wreckage of the battlefield, breathed heavily, Mjolnir glowing faintly with residual energy. He had tested his strength, his moral compass, and his emerging understanding of the Force. And he had won, not by destroying his enemy, but by asserting the primacy of choice and restraint. As the dust settled, Thor turned to the Jedi, particularly Master Vandar, whose gaze was a mixture of relief and astonishment. "You see now why we must teach discipline," Vandar said quietly. Thor nodded, still surveying the battlefield. "I have seen discipline, yes. But I have also seen opportunity, the ways in which power can protect rather than simply punish. I will take this lesson into every battle I face in this galaxy." The rebel base, though battered, was safe. The Empire had been temporarily repelled, yet the shadow of retaliation loomed. Thor had proven himself as a powerful ally, but the challenge was only beginning. The galaxy would learn slowly that a god wielding the Force was not merely a weapon. It was a force of moral consequence, unpredictably shaping the future with every decision. In the quiet aftermath, Thor meditated, focusing on the currents of the Force, feeling the resonance of every life affected by the battle. He understood, now more than ever, that true power in this galaxy was not measured in destruction or conquest, but in the choices one made when omnipotence tempted the spirit. The path ahead would test his strength, ethics, and patience, challenging him as no frost giant, dark god, or cosmic threat ever had. And he welcomed it. The aftermath of Thor's clash with Vader left the rebel base reeling. The surviving Imperial forces had retreated, but their presence had carved scars across the landscape. Burning craters, shattered buildings, and displaced civilians bore testament to the violence that had unfolded. Thor stood at the edge of a plateau overlooking the battlefield, Mjolnir suspended in one hand as if it, too, was contemplating the consequences of the encounter. The Force flowed differently here, charged with fear, anger, and hope, intertwining with Thor's own godly essence in ways he was only beginning to understand. Kayla and the rebel command approached cautiously. The pilot-turned-strategist had never seen a being like Thor, not in her wildest visions of the galaxy's strange powers. "That was extraordinary," she murmured, eyes scanning the horizon where smoke spiraled into the sky. "But the Empire will return, and next time they'll bring everything." Thor lowered his weapon and looked at her, his expression a mixture of awe, thoughtfulness, and the weight of responsibility. "Then we prepare, not just with force, but with strategy and foresight. The Force is not merely power, it is guidance. It tells me where the Empire will strike, but it cannot make choices for us. We must act." Thor's words carried more weight than Kayla could have anticipated. The rebels, long accustomed to guerrilla tactics and small victories, now faced the reality of having a godly being aligned with them. The psychological shift was immediate. Morale surged, but so did tension. Thor's presence attracted attention beyond the immediate battlefield. Scans detected unusual energy fluctuations in nearby systems, and Jedi monitoring the Force sensed the anomaly. Thor's growing integration of his lightning with the Force had created a disturbance, subtle but undeniable, like ripples across an entire ocean. Master Vandar, arriving with a small contingent of Jedi, approached Thor cautiously. "Your arrival is unprecedented," Vandar said, voice measured, yet tinged with awe. "You wield the Force in ways we do not fully understand. Tell me, Thor, do you seek to learn, to ally, or to dominate?" Thor considered the question, feeling the pulse of the Force around him, the weight of potential lives influenced by his actions. "I seek understanding. Power is a tool, not a master. I fight to protect, yes, but the path must be just. If I am to wield this Force responsibly, I must learn its boundaries, its spirit, not just its capability." The Jedi regarded him silently, sensing his sincerity. Yet the galaxy's currents were already shifting. Rumors of a godlike being capable of harnessing the Force spread quickly, reaching the ears of less scrupulous factions, the Mandalorians, opportunistic warlords, and, of course, the Sith. Darth Vader, having returned to the Emperor, reported Thor's extraordinary capabilities, emphasizing his hybridized mastery of both godly lightning and the Force. Palpatine's reaction was measured yet sinister. A power that rivals even the strongest Sith, he mused, fingers steepled. Thor may yet prove useful, or dangerous beyond imagination. Prepare a contingency. The Force itself cannot be allowed to fall outside our control. Meanwhile, Thor's adaptation to the Force accelerated. Days of meditation, training, and experimentation revealed his unique affinity. His lightning could flow with Force currents, amplified by his awareness of the living energy around him. He could strike with precision, heal minor injuries, and even subtly manipulate probability in battle. Yet with every advancement came a lesson in humility. The Force demanded respect, a balance he had not encountered in Asgard or during his cosmic battles. Unlike gods of his own realm, here the Force was impartial, neither inherently cruel nor kind. It simply reflected the choices of those who wielded it. Rebel scouts reported increasing Imperial patrols near the sectors Thor and the rebels now controlled. Thor's strategic mind, honed over centuries of warfare in his own universe, worked in tandem with the Force. He devised ambushes, feints, and diversions, turning the Empire's numerical advantage against them. Lightning fused with Force pushes became an art of warfare, a spectacle of tactical brilliance and raw power. Each engagement left Thor more attuned to the Force and more aware of the moral and political ramifications of his actions. It was during one such skirmish that Thor first encountered a different faction, the Mandalorians. A lone patrol, initially hostile, intercepted a convoy of rebel supplies. Thor approached with measured caution, lifting a hand and letting the Force ripple outward, sensing intentions before words were spoken. The Mandalorian leader, Beskar-clad and wary, regarded him silently. "You wield a power we do not understand," she said. "Who are you to walk among us?" Thor lowered Mjolnir respectfully. "I am Thor. I fight not to conquer, but to protect. I mean no harm to those who live honorably." The Mandalorian's eyes narrowed, evaluating Thor's tone and presence. The subtle resonance of the Force emanating from him was alien, but there was authenticity, an alignment with a warrior's honor rather than an overlord's ambition. "Then prove it," she said finally. A sudden skirmish erupted as pirates, attracted to the conflict, attacked. Thor's combined mastery of lightning and the Force turned the tide, saving the Mandalorian squad and earning their cautious respect. "Perhaps there is merit in your ways," the leader conceded, hinting at possible future cooperation. Thor recognized the lesson. Alliances in this galaxy were not given. They were earned through deeds and honor. Yet even as Thor navigated these alliances, the shadow of the Sith loomed. Darth Vader's mind was relentless, calculating, and unyielding. He returned to confront Thor, not as a direct opponent initially, but as a manipulator seeking to turn the godly warrior against his new allies. In subtle ways, Vader orchestrated scenarios designed to test Thor's moral compass. Rebel lives endangered, civilians trapped. Strategic choices weighted toward either reckless action or deliberate inaction. Each test revealed Thor's unique character, a god learning humility and ethical responsibility within the strict currents of the Force. Thor's understanding of diplomacy, combat, and strategy became intertwined. He realized that power was meaningless without perception, morality, and foresight. Through the Force, he could sense Vader's maneuvers and anticipate attacks. But to exploit every advantage would risk becoming a tyrant in his own right. The galaxy's delicate balance required restraint, and Thor's maturation into this reality was both rapid and perilous. His training was not simply about harnessing energy. It was about aligning his will with purpose, intention, and consequence. Kayla, observing Thor's evolution, noted subtle shifts in rebel operations. "He's not just fighting," she whispered. "He's teaching us how to fight smarter, how to survive against impossible odds." Thor nodded silently, feeling the Force ripple in affirmation. Even the rebels, seasoned by years of conflict, were learning from his integration of godly might and Force discipline. Thor was no longer an outsider. He was becoming a catalyst for transformation, an agent capable of reshaping the strategy and morale of every faction he touched. But the moral and tactical lessons would be tested again soon. Imperial scouts detected Thor's growing influence, and the Empire escalated. TIE fighters roared through the skies, stormtroopers tightened patrols, and the subtle, menacing presence of Sith agents began infiltrating systems under Thor's protection. These agents sought not only victory, but disruption, to challenge Thor's ethical choices, to tempt him with shortcuts, to lure him into decisions that would compromise his alliances or endanger innocence. Thor sensed the approaching storm, yet his confidence had grown. He understood that true mastery of the Force was not domination, but insight, restraint, and the courage to make choices under pressure. Thor stands atop a cliff overlooking the rebel base, the twin suns of the system casting long shadows across his figure. Mjolnir rests lightly at his side, a physical anchor to the godly power he retains, while the Force hums through him like an invisible symphony. He has begun to integrate fully into the galaxy's complex web of politics, ethics, and warfare. Allies and enemies alike are watching, adjusting, anticipating the next move. Thor is no longer simply a visitor. He is a participant, a force to be reckoned with, and a moral agent whose choices will shape not only the outcome of this conflict, but the destiny of the galaxy itself. Thor's presence had shifted the balance across multiple star systems. The rebels, who once struggled with limited resources and scattered operations, now coordinated daring strikes with precision and audacity previously unthinkable. Every mission was enhanced by Thor's unique fusion of godly power and Force mastery. But with each engagement came the inescapable realization that the galaxy's currents were far more complex than battles alone. Strategy, diplomacy, and moral judgment had become as essential as raw strength. The first mission to demonstrate Thor's evolving acumen was a rescue operation on the remote planet of Dathomir. The Imperials had captured a group of Force-sensitive children, planning to experiment on them to accelerate the development of Force-based weapons. Thor arrived in orbit aboard a modified Y-wing, Mjolnir crackling with controlled energy as he surveyed the battlefield. The Force whispered subtle warnings. Sensors alone could not detect the traps, the ambushes, the morally gray dilemmas hidden in the shadows. Thor could sense fear, courage, and desperation radiating from every sentient being. Every choice mattered. Kayla briefed him on the situation as the ship approached the planet's surface. "We can't risk a frontal assault," she said, scanning the holomap. "The Imperials have automated defenses linked to the planet's magnetic field. One misstep and the children won't make it." Thor nodded, feeling the Force flow around the magnetic interference. "Then we adapt. A storm is coming, but it can be directed. Trust the Force, trust the power within, but above all trust judgment." Thor's plan combined Force manipulation, tactical intelligence, and sheer audacity. Using his lightning, he generated an electromagnetic pulse that temporarily disabled Imperial defenses. But this was only a precursor. He would need precision to avoid harming the children. The Force guided his hand as Mjolnir struck with deliberate force, each thunderclap timed to mimic natural phenomena, masking his intervention. Storms of lightning danced across the Dathomirian plains, scattering Imperial patrols without casualties among innocents. Every action was a lesson in restraint. His powers, formidable in their own right, could destroy as easily as they could liberate. Thor was learning that true mastery required balance, not dominance. During the ground engagement, Thor encountered the first morally complex choice of his campaign. A group of Imperial scientists had rigged a containment field capable of annihilating the children if a specific sequence of commands was executed. Thor could rush forward, striking down the scientists with unrestrained lightning, but the risk of collateral damage was too high. The Force whispered solutions that required ingenuity rather than brute force. Thor instead manipulated the field itself, redirecting its energy harmlessly into the sky, neutralizing the threat without killing. In that moment, Thor understood the Force's subtle power. Sometimes the greatest strength lay in precision, restraint, and foresight. The Dathomir mission ended in a stunning victory. The children were rescued, the Imperials humiliated, and the rebels learned new operational strategies from observing Thor in action. Yet, beyond the immediate triumph, the consequences of his intervention rippled through the galaxy. Imperial command, unable to comprehend the integration of godly power with Force mastery, accelerated plans to develop anti-Force technology. Vader, obsessed with containing Thor, began constructing contingency squads infused with both technological augmentations and Sith training to counter his abilities. Thor, aware of these preparations through subtle ripples in the Force, knew that victory was temporary. Each action attracted attention, enemies, and moral dilemmas of increasing complexity. Meanwhile, Thor's interactions with independent factions expanded. On the planet Mandalore, Thor negotiated an uneasy alliance with the newly reformed Mandalorian clans. The Mandalorians, impressed by his combat prowess and adherence to a personal code of honor, agreed to provide intelligence and support for select operations. Thor recognized the delicate nature of these alliances. They were not bound by ideology or allegiance to the Force, but by mutual respect and shared objectives. His ability to navigate these relationships without compromising ethical standards marked a significant evolution in his understanding of power. Leadership, he realized, was not about fear or awe. It was about trust, earned and maintained through action. The ethical dimension of Thor's journey became even more pronounced when he encountered a faction of rogue Jedi who had abandoned the Council, seeking power for personal gain. They attempted to recruit Thor to their cause, arguing that his godly essence, combined with Force abilities, could allow them to seize control of entire systems and enforce order in ways the Republic or the rebels never could. Thor's response was unequivocal. Order imposed through fear is no order at all. Power is responsibility, not dominion. He dispatched the rogue Jedi, subduing them without lethal force, demonstrating the integration of moral clarity and tactical genius that had become his signature. This pattern of ethically guided action extended to political spheres as well. Thor began mediating disputes between planetary governors, rebel commanders, and local militias. The Force allowed him to perceive the truth of intentions, while his personal sense of justice guided equitable outcomes. Every negotiation, every battle, every choice reinforced his understanding that the galaxy was a network of cause and effect. Power without discernment could not protect, liberate, or heal. It could only destroy. The culmination arrived with Thor's first direct confrontation with Vader under circumstances engineered to test his moral and tactical mettle. Vader had orchestrated a scenario on the industrial world of Corellia, manipulating civilians and rebel forces alike to lure Thor into an apparent trap. As Thor descended onto the planet's surface, lightning fused with the Force in a dazzling display of controlled energy. Vader's voice resonated across the battlefield through comm links, calm but cold. Thor, your mercy is a weakness. Harness the power you possess. Crush them all. Let nothing stand in your way. Thor paused, sensing the layers of manipulation beneath the words. Civilians and rebel forces were at risk if he acted impulsively. The Force revealed paths forward that balanced intervention with restraint, but each carried potential cost. Thor chose the path of precision, striking at key points in the Imperial machinery, neutralizing threats without harming innocence. Vader, momentarily frustrated, retreated, not defeated, but forced to reassess Thor's capabilities. The encounter crystallized a key principle. Thor's integration of godly might with Force mastery was not merely a weapon, but a moral instrument capable of reshaping conflict in unexpected ways. Thor's influence had expanded beyond the immediate theater of battle. Rebels, Mandalorians, and even neutral factions began to recalibrate their expectations of power, strategy, and leadership. Imperial forces scrambled to adapt, deploying increasingly sophisticated technology and Sith-trained operatives. The galaxy itself seemed to respond to Thor's presence, not as a mere foreign warrior, but as a living nexus of choice, consequence, and potential. Thor, for his part, was no longer a visitor. He was a participant, an agent whose decisions would define the next era of conflict, morality, and alliance across star systems. The galaxy was changing. Thor's presence had become a ripple, with far-reaching consequences, felt across star systems, from the dusty plains of Tatooine to the gleaming spires of Coruscant. No longer could Imperial commanders assume dominance, nor could rebel leaders operate with the usual caution. The God of Thunder, now a Force-sensitive warrior of unprecedented caliber, had introduced variables that challenged every established strategy and philosophy. Every action he took carried weight. Every choice set off a chain of reactions that no one, not Jedi, Sith, or civilian, could fully predict. Thor's next campaign took him to the Mid-Rim, where the Separatists had carved out new territories, exploiting the vacuum left after earlier conflicts with the Empire. Intelligence indicated that a fleet of heavily armed droid cruisers had seized control of a key hyperspace route connecting the Outer Rim to the core. The loss of this route threatened both rebel logistics and the stability of neutral systems. Thor knew that brute strength alone would not suffice. The engagement required precision, diplomacy, and strategic deception. He had learned from Dathomir that the Force, combined with his godly power, demanded restraint and cunning. His arrival in the system was unheralded. The cruiser, a heavily modified Y-wing, slipped through detection arrays with Thor's Force-assisted guidance. On board, rebel pilots whispered tales of the god among them, though few had seen him directly in combat. Thor stood in the control chamber, Mjolnir crackling with controlled energy, attuned to the currents of the Force that flowed through every star, every asteroid, every ship. He could sense the droid fleet's deployment patterns, the programming behind their algorithms, and even the subtle anticipatory calculations of their command AI. It was a puzzle that blended logic, instinct, and raw power. Thor chose a multi-pronged approach. First, he projected himself through the Force to subtly manipulate the droid sensors, creating phantom readings that suggested multiple rebel reinforcements where none existed. This diversion split the fleet into smaller, less coordinated groups. Next, using Mjolnir and his mastery of electrical energy amplified by the Force, he selectively disabled key components in the cruiser's power systems. The effect was precise, crippling critical systems while leaving structural integrity intact, ensuring minimal collateral damage, and avoiding unnecessary civilian casualties in nearby systems. Thor had refined his ability to combine Force foresight with controlled godly power, each strike deliberate, each choice ethically weighted. The Separatist commanders, unnerved by the unseen Force manipulating their fleets, began desperate maneuvers, unaware that the true threat was not destruction but strategy. Thor's ability to perceive through the Force allowed him to anticipate every countermeasure, every tactical adjustment. Yet even with godly power and Force sensitivity, Thor faced the limits of knowledge. The Separatists had deployed a rogue AI that had learned from the Clone Wars, capable of predicting nonlinear tactics and adapting almost as quickly as Thor could manipulate events. He realized that victory required more than power. It required insight into the heart of intelligence, the psychology of commanders, and the improvisational instincts of sentient beings. During the campaign, Thor was forced to make one of his most morally complex choices yet. A Separatist cruiser had taken refuge above a planet inhabited by sentient beings whose biospheres were delicate and easily destabilized. An all-out strike could annihilate the fleet in minutes, but the collateral damage to the planet's ecosystem would be catastrophic. The Force guided him to a solution, a subtle manipulation of the planet's magnetic field, using Mjolnir as a conduit, that induced an artificial storm to temporarily stall the cruiser without harming the environment. Thor's ability to integrate power, Force sensitivity, and ethical reasoning became a hallmark of his growing reputation. He was no longer merely a weapon. He was a mediator, a judge, and a tactician in a galaxy where conventional strategies had failed. As news of Thor's campaign spread, the political landscape shifted. Neutral systems that had remained wary of rebel or imperial influence began seeking his counsel. Some sent envoys offering resources, while others sent spies attempting to uncover the limits of his power. Thor treated each approach with scrutiny. Alliances were not granted lightly. trust had to be earned, loyalty proven. In one system, a coalition of merchant worlds offered a fleet of transport ships in exchange for guarantees of protection from both Imperial and Sith exploitation. Thor mediated negotiations personally, demonstrating that strength coupled with wisdom could command respect across cultural, political, and species boundaries. The Empire, meanwhile, could not ignore Thor's growing influence. Vader, still obsessed with subduing the godly interloper, deployed Inquisitors augmented with experimental cybernetics, designed to counteract Force abilities while resisting physical attacks. Thor anticipated these moves through the Force, yet each encounter tested his limits. The Cyber Inquisitors moved with mechanical precision, resisting direct strikes and attempting to manipulate his perception. Thor had to rely on improvisation, blending speed, perception, and strategy to neutralize threats without unnecessary lethality. Each victory against these engineered opponents reinforced his understanding that the Force, when combined with ethical judgment, could amplify power without becoming destructive. Thor's interactions with the criminal underworld on Nar Shaddaa, the smuggler's moon. Thor sought information regarding hidden Imperial outposts and separatist sympathizers. Here, diplomacy blended with intimidation. Thor did not threaten recklessly. His reputation preceded him. Local syndicates respected strength, but also valued fairness and cleverness. Thor brokered deals that benefited both parties while maintaining a moral compass. Credits exchanged for intelligence, access granted in exchange for the promise of protection, contracts negotiated with honor rather than fear. In these urban jungles, Thor's ability to read intentions through the Force allowed him to navigate deception and ambition with precision, earning grudging respect even from those who dealt in shadows. The culmination arrived with a confrontation that would test every lesson Thor had learned. Intelligence revealed a secret Imperial facility on a remote asteroid field, producing a new class of droid designed to hunt Force-sensitive beings. The stakes were clear. Failure would not only jeopardize the rebels, but threaten all sentient life in the sector. Thor approached with caution, aware that the Force's currents signaled both danger and opportunity. Using a combination of stealth, Force manipulation, and raw power, he infiltrated the facility. His presence disrupted the droid's algorithms, Mjolnir disabling control nodes, while he leveraged telekinetic precision to avoid harm to automated units not directly involved in the threat. Inside, Thor confronted an Imperial scientist experimenting on a Force-sensitive child, attempting to weaponize their potential. The moral choice here was agonizing. Immediate action could save the child but risk exposure to overwhelming reinforcements. Delay could mean death or worse. Thor acted decisively, using the Force to shield the child while dismantling containment measures with controlled bursts of lightning. Each move was measured, reflecting the cumulative wisdom of countless engagements, political negotiations, and ethical dilemmas. The child was freed, the facility incapacitated, and the Imperial forces forced into retreat. Across multiple systems, from rebels to neutral planets, from Mandalorian clans to smugglers' guilds, the name of the Thunder God who walked with the Force became synonymous with precision, judgment, and unassailable competence. Yet, the galaxy remained volatile. Vader's obsession had deepened, rogue factions sought advantage, and neutral systems tested boundaries. Thor had not only integrated himself into the Star Wars galaxy, he had irrevocably altered its political, moral, and military landscape. His next steps would require even greater foresight, skill, and the tempered judgment of a being who wielded godlike power in a universe defined by the subtleties of the Force. Thor's journey demonstrated a critical evolution. Raw power was insufficient. Moral clarity, strategic improvisation, and diplomatic acumen were as essential to his success as his lightning, Mjolnir, or Force-sensitive abilities. The galaxy was alive with consequences, and Thor, as both interloper and participant, was learning that true mastery meant understanding not only what could be done, but what should be done. Each encounter, negotiation, and battle refined his understanding, shaping him into a figure whose presence would challenge the galaxy's assumptions, inspire loyalty, and provoke fear in equal measure. The stage was set for escalating conflict. With Vader observing, rogue Jedi scheming, and Imperial resources mobilizing, Thor would need every ounce of his skill, judgment, and insight to navigate the coming storms. The galaxy was watching, and the godly Force wielder was ready to respond. The galaxy had never faced a presence like Thor. Rumors of the Thunder God's campaigns had spread like wildfire, reaching both the highest echelons of the Empire and the farthest corners of independent star systems. For the rebels, he had become a beacon of hope, an almost mythical ally whose power could tip the balance in seemingly hopeless situations. For the Empire, he represented a dangerous anomaly, a threat that no fleet, no tactical plan, and no Sith strategy could fully anticipate. And yet, despite the attention, Thor moved with purpose and precision, guided by the Force, honed instincts, and a steadily growing understanding of Star Wars politics and warfare. Thor's next mission was fraught with peril. Intelligence had revealed that a faction of rogue Jedi, disillusioned by the Jedi Council's rigid doctrines, had formed an independent enclave on the remote ice world of Ordo. These Jedi had been quietly influencing local politics, establishing militias, and stockpiling weapons, seeking to carve out their own vision of galactic balance. While not aligned with the Sith or Empire, their actions threatened the stability of surrounding systems and risked igniting conflicts between neutral territories and Imperial patrols. Thor recognized the complexity of the situation immediately. It was not a simple matter of light versus dark. Power alone would not solve this dilemma. Diplomacy, negotiation, and ethical decision-making were paramount. Arriving in orbit above Ordo, Thor felt the icy currents of the planet resonate through the Force, alerting him to subtle disturbances. There were signs of energy manipulation unlike anything he had seen before, an amalgamation of classical Force techniques and experimental rituals reminiscent of Dathomirian magic. His instincts screamed caution. Deploying his forces carefully, Thor initiated a reconnaissance operation, utilizing stealth and Force-projected presences to observe the rogue Jedi enclave. He noted that their training had evolved independently, creating abilities that sometimes mirrored, but often diverged from, traditional Jedi practices. Telekinetic constructs, energy-resistant barriers, and rapid movement through the Force made them formidable opponents. The first encounter tested Thor's combat philosophy. A squadron of rogue Jedi emerged from the icy mists, lightsabers ignited, eyes narrowed with suspicion and readiness for battle. Thor did not attack immediately. Instead, he extended his awareness through the Force, projecting an aura of calm and openness, signaling his non-hostile intent. The rogue Jedi were taken aback. Few had ever encountered a being of such overwhelming power who did not immediately seek conflict. Thor spoke through the Force, conveying his purpose and emphasizing the potential for cooperation rather than confrontation. Yet, words were not enough. Their mistrust was rooted in years of independence and secrecy. A duel became inevitable. The clash was both spectacular and disciplined. Thor wielded Mjolnir with masterful precision, integrating Force-enhanced movements to counter lightsaber strikes and telekinetic attacks. His strikes were controlled, designed to incapacitate rather than destroy, reflecting the lessons learned from previous engagements with Separatists and Imperial forces. Each movement demonstrated a synthesis of Asgardian might and Force discipline, a dynamic the rogue Jedi had never encountered. Despite their considerable skill, they struggled against Thor's blend of strategic foresight, raw power, and moral restraint. Midway through the engagement, Thor faced a profound ethical decision. One of the rogue Jedi, a young adept with the potential for great Force sensitivity, had been thrown into a precarious position during the fight, trapped under debris and exposed to a sudden energy surge that could prove lethal. Thor could have easily neutralized all threats, ensuring swift victory, but doing so would have risked killing the young Jedi. Instead, he used a combination of Force manipulation and Mjolnir's controlled lightning to stabilize the situation, saving the Jedi while simultaneously disarming their attackers. The rogue Jedi's leader, witnessing Thor's calculated mercy, began to reconsider their assumptions about power, authority, and morality. After the confrontation, Thor engaged in dialogue with the rogue Jedi enclave. The discussions were tense, philosophical, and layered with the complexity of differing visions for justice, order, and balance. Thor emphasized the necessity of understanding consequences beyond immediate action. Rogue power without ethical consideration led to destabilization, even when intentions were noble. Over hours, even days, he earned a measure of trust. By the time negotiations concluded, the rogue Jedi agreed to limit their interventions and share intelligence with Thor on Imperial and Separatist movements in nearby systems. In turn, Thor pledged to aid in the protection of their enclave from external threats, establishing an unprecedented cooperative relationship. The consequences of this encounter reverberated quickly. Other systems, hearing of Thor's measured approach, began sending envoys to gauge his philosophy and intentions. Planets previously on the fence regarding the rebellion or empire now saw him as a potential stabilizing force, capable of balancing power while respecting local autonomy. The Mandalorians, who had long respected individual strength and tactical acumen, took particular interest. A delegation arrived, seeking to test Thor's combat abilities in controlled sparring exercises. Thor's interactions with them highlighted a key evolution. He was learning to navigate cultures and traditions distinct from both his native Asgardian experience and the Jedi or Sith philosophies. His presence was shaping not only military outcomes, but cultural and diplomatic landscapes. Simultaneously, the Empire grew restless. Darth Vader, aware of Thor's activities, intensified his surveillance. Imperial fleets began rerouting, attempting to anticipate Thor's maneuvers and identify patterns. Vader deployed Inquisitors, trained in both traditional dark side techniques and cybernetically enhanced combat, designed specifically to challenge Thor's hybrid approach of godly strength and force mastery. Thor anticipated these moves through his heightened force awareness, yet the encounters tested his limits. Cyber-enhanced adversaries could resist some force manipulations and counter physical strikes with precision timing. Each confrontation required him to innovate, blending brute power with strategic restraint, ethical calculation, and improvisation. During one particularly harrowing engagement, Thor faced a combined force of 5 Inquisitors in the asteroid fields surrounding Duro. The battle was a symphony of chaos and control. Lightning coursed through Mjolnir, augmented by the Force, as Thor countered coordinated force assaults with precision strikes. Debris floated around them, manipulated by telekinesis, shielding civilians from harm while simultaneously confounding attackers. One Inquisitor attempted a dark side seduction, trying to provoke anger, fear, and impatience in Thor. Recognizing the psychological tactic, Thor used meditation and force clarity to maintain composure, turning aggression into a strategic advantage. Every strike, every motion, was calculated to neutralize the threat while avoiding unnecessary destruction. In the end, Thor's legend had expanded beyond myth into tangible influence. He had proven capable of balancing diplomacy, ethical decision-making, and combat mastery, even against the most challenging adversaries the galaxy could present. Rogue factions, Mandalorians, rebellion cells, and neutral systems now considered him not only a powerful ally, but a force of measured judgment. The Empire, meanwhile, was forced to acknowledge that traditional power structures, fleets, and strategies were insufficient against a being who combined godly might, force sensitivity, and moral clarity. Yet, with success came new complications. Imperial scrutiny intensified. Rival factions sought to exploit political vacuums, and rogue Jedi splinter cells tested the boundaries of cooperation. Thor's next challenge would demand not only power and skill, but foresight, intuition, and the ability to navigate moral and philosophical dilemmas that were increasingly complex. The galaxy was watching, and Thor's choices would shape events for decades to come. He was no longer merely a visitor. He had become a force capable of rewriting the rules of engagement, morality, and leadership in a galaxy defined by the delicate balance of power, ideology, and consequence. Thor's journey demonstrated the growing depth of his integration into the Star Wars galaxy. The combination of raw power, force mastery, diplomacy, and moral reasoning was redefining the limits of influence. Every engagement, From icy battles with rogue Jedi to strategic diplomacy with neutral systems and Mandalorian clans, contributed to a nuanced understanding of the galaxy. Thor had become more than a warrior. He was a mediator, a strategist, and a symbol that power, when tempered with wisdom, could forge new possibilities even in a universe dominated by conflict. The stage was set for escalating confrontation. Imperial resources were converging, Sith influence was shadowing every decision, and rogue elements, both Jedi and criminal, were testing boundaries. Thor, however, had grown into a role few could challenge, a godly force wielder whose moral compass, strategic brilliance, and sheer power made him a living anomaly in a galaxy defined by order, chaos, and the Force. The coming chapters would see his influence reach into the heart of Imperial power and beyond, as the delicate equilibrium of the galaxy hung in the balance. The galaxy had begun to shift beneath Thor's presence. Systems once quietly resisting Imperial oversight now whispered his name in reverent tones, while Imperial intelligence networks scrambled to interpret this anomaly, a god from another universe, wielding both cosmic might and the enigmatic energies of the Force. Darth Vader, having personally observed the subtle disturbances in the Force that Thor caused, understood that conventional tactics would not suffice. He convened a council of Inquisitors, Imperial strategists, and Sith loyalists aboard a shadowed Star Destroyer orbiting the Outer Rim. The discussion was not merely about strategy. It was about the existential threat that a being of this magnitude represented. Vader's own connection to the Force told him that Thor's alignment could tip the scales irreversibly, and he would not leave such an outcome to chance. Vader's plan was both precise and ruthless. Thor's previous victories against rogue Jedi and engagements with neutral systems had created pockets of influence that required containment. Vader intended to isolate Thor, severing his alliances before striking directly. The Empire's fleet mobilized in silence, shadowing Thor's movements, while Inquisitors prepared for a coordinated strike designed to test the Thunder God's abilities to their fullest extent. Yet even as the Empire plotted, Thor remained several steps ahead. His communion with the Force had deepened, allowing him to sense subtle currents, detect manipulations, and anticipate maneuvers that would confound even the most experienced tacticians. The first confrontation occurred near the volcanic planet of Mustafar, an environment chosen by Vader not only for strategic advantage, but also symbolic resonance, a place steeped in the dark side, a crucible for testing willpower. Thor arrived to find the landscape cloaked in ash and fire, the lava flows reflecting his own lightning, as if mirroring the chaos he anticipated. Vader emerged from the shadows, lightsaber ignited, and the clash began with an intensity that shook the planet itself. The duel was not merely physical, it was philosophical, a battle of wills as much as a display of raw power. Thor's approach was refined. He wielded Mjolnir with precision augmented by the Force, deflecting lightsaber strikes while projecting Force-enhanced bursts of energy that disrupted Vader's balance without overcommitting. Vader responded with calculated aggression, exploiting openings created by Thor's movements while attempting to destabilize his moral center. The dark side lashed out, probing for anger, fear, and doubt, emotions Thor had struggled to suppress during every previous encounter. Yet Thor's resolve had been tested and tempered through months of integration into this galaxy. Each challenge he faced, from rogue Jedi to Mandalorian duels, had sharpened both his martial instincts and ethical fortitude. The duel escalated, moving from volcanic plains to jagged cliffs, and then into the labyrinthine remnants of ancient Mustafarian ruins. The air crackled with electricity, the Force itself bending around Thor's interventions. He demonstrated a mastery of combined Asgardian power and Force abilities, using lightning not merely as a weapon, but as a tool to manipulate terrain, create barriers, and channel energy with precision. Vader, equally adept in the dark side, found himself continuously adapting, realizing that brute power alone would not subdue this adversary. Every strike Thor delivered was informed by tactical foresight, ethical restraint, and the subtle currents of the Force. Midway through the battle, Thor faced a dilemma that would define his philosophy in this galaxy. Vader attempted a feint, leveraging Force persuasion to convince Thor to abandon alliances he had painstakingly cultivated. The Dark Lord spoke of efficiency, the futility of mercy, and the inevitability of galactic domination under a singular authority. Thor could have responded with decisive violence, ending the confrontation swiftly. Instead, he paused, channeling the Force to discern Vader's intentions fully and weigh the broader consequences of his actions. The decision was profoundly moral: to strike with absolute power, potentially extinguishing hope across countless systems, or to seek a path that preserved lives, alliances, and the fragile equilibrium he had nurtured. Thor's choice was deliberate. He struck with controlled force, neutralizing Vader's immediate assault without causing lethal damage, and used the ensuing momentum to create a strategic retreat rather than outright victory. The act of restraint astonished the assembled Inquisitors, many of whom had expected a simple confrontation resulting in death or subjugation. Thor's approach sent a clear message. Strength alone did not define supremacy in this galaxy. Wisdom, moral discernment, and the judicious application of power were equally decisive. The aftermath of Mustafar reverberated throughout the galaxy. Imperial command interpreted the duel not as a failure, but as a signal of unprecedented risk. Thor's combination of godly might, Force mastery, and ethical resolve meant that the Empire could not simply crush him. It had to rethink doctrine, fleet deployment, and Sith strategy. Reports circulated to the Rebel Alliance and neutral systems alike, creating a complex web of speculation, awe, and anticipation. Thor's legend had reached a critical mass, inspiring hope, fear, and political recalibration simultaneously. Meanwhile, Thor's own understanding of the Force continued to evolve. Beyond combat applications, he explored subtler aspects of manipulation and perception, learning to sense disturbances in planetary ecosystems, predict movements of fleets, and even influence negotiations across political factions. His encounters with Mandalorians had reinforced the importance of honor and trust, while rogue Jedi interactions had underscored the necessity of ethical clarity when dealing with the morally ambiguous. By combining these lessons with his Asgardian experience, Thor began formulating strategies that were not only effective in battle, but transformative across diplomatic, cultural, and ethical domains. Thor's next target was an Imperial outpost orbiting the industrial planet of Sullust. Intelligence suggested that the Empire was preparing experimental weaponry capable of countering both conventional and Force-enhanced threats. Thor approached with a calculated plan, rather than rushing into direct assault. He deployed reconnaissance via Force projection, analyzed energy signatures, and coordinated simultaneous maneuvers to minimize civilian casualties. He confronted Imperial engineers and officers with overwhelming power, yet restrained his interventions to preserve infrastructure, again demonstrating the unique balance between might and morality that defined his approach. Within the outpost, Thor encountered Inquisitors equipped with cybernetic enhancements, specifically designed to counter his lightning and Force techniques. The ensuing engagement was a masterclass in hybrid warfare. Thor combined rapid Asgardian combat maneuvers with Force-mediated telekinesis, disarming opponents, redirecting energy blasts, and neutralizing mechanical augmentations with precision. The battle was lengthy and exhausting, pushing Thor to his limits while requiring continual adaptation. He learned to anticipate technological countermeasures, using environmental features, the Force, and his own ingenuity to maintain advantage without unnecessary destruction. Thor had solidified a pattern of influence that few in the galaxy could counter. Imperial fleets now hesitated before deploying against him. Rogue factions recalculated their movements, and neutral systems sent envoys seeking guidance, alliance, or protection. Thor's philosophy of measured intervention, moral restraint, and strategic application of power was reshaping the perception of conflict and authority in a galaxy long defined by binary allegiances. His actions had created a network of influence extending from independent worlds to Mandalorian enclaves, rogue Jedi, and even elements within the rebellion. However, the stakes continued to rise. Vader, frustrated by Thor's ability to adapt and maintain moral clarity, began considering more drastic measures. Secret alliances with other dark side practitioners, experimental warships, and targeted subterfuge were all under consideration. Thor, aware of this escalation through the Force, prepared for the inevitable convergence, a multi-faction showdown that would determine not only his fate, but the trajectory of galactic conflict. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test every lesson he had learned, every alliance he had cultivated, and every principle he had maintained since arriving in this galaxy. Thor's journey had moved him from legendary warrior to galactic strategist, diplomat, and moral exemplar. Every dual negotiation and encounter reinforced a central truth. True power in the Star Wars galaxy required not only physical strength and force mastery, but also insight, empathy, and the willingness to make ethically complex decisions. As the Imperial response intensified and the web of galactic intrigue grew tighter, Thor's next steps would determine whether he became a lasting symbol of hope or a temporary anomaly swept away by the tides of history. The galaxy trembled under the weight of converging forces. Thor, fully aware that the Imperial response was reaching its apex, prepared for what could only be described as a decisive battle, a confrontation that would determine not just his fate, but the balance of power across star systems. Reports had reached him of fleet movements across multiple sectors, Imperial Inquisitors consolidating under Darth Vader's command, and experimental warships equipped with technology designed specifically to counter his hybrid Asgardian force abilities. Thor's mind, a blend of tactical genius, honed over millennia, and newfound force intuition, mapped every possible outcome. Yet even with such foresight, he knew that victory would demand more than brute strength. It would require ingenuity, ethical precision, and the trust of the alliances he had cultivated throughout his journey. The confrontation began in orbit above the industrial world of Corellia, a planet whose shipyards and supply lines were vital to Imperial operations. Thor had chosen the battlefield deliberately, close enough to disrupt key operations, yet open enough to maneuver, without causing civilian devastation. His allies were assembled, Mandalorian warriors whose Beskar armor was reinforced against energy attacks, rogue Jedi who had begun to see in Thor a philosophy of measured intervention, and independent systems ready to support the strategic use of force rather than indiscriminate violence. Thor's leadership, honed by Asgardian command and tempered through months in this galaxy, had transformed him into a figure both feared and revered, a lightning-imbued strategist capable of influencing outcomes without compromising his principles. The first wave of Imperial forces arrived in silence, a fleet of star destroyers flanking squadrons of TIE fighters, their sensors scanning for anomalies. Darth Vader, aboard a personally customized Executor-class vessel, maintained a direct connection through the Force, probing for Thor's weaknesses, anticipating the hybrid tactics that had already confounded his Inquisitors on Mustafar and Sullust. Thor, sensing the storm through the Force, adjusted his strategy in real time. Using Force-enhanced perception, he identified energy fluctuations within the fleet, pinpointing ships carrying experimental countermeasures. His lightning crackled, amplified through Force channels, as he began a preemptive strike designed to disable critical systems without unnecessary loss of life. The battle escalated rapidly. Thor combined Asgardian might and Force-mediated control to manipulate gravitational currents around the fleet, redirecting fire from planetary targets and disrupting coordinated attacks. Mandalorian strike teams executed precision boarding maneuvers, while rogue Jedi deflected enemy blaster fire and engaged in duels that drew Vader's attention. Thor's Mjolnir became an instrument of both destruction and containment. He shattered engines, redirected volleys of turbolaser fire, and created protective energy fields to shield civilian installations. The choreography of the engagement was breathtaking, a symphony of controlled power, tactical brilliance, and ethical calculation. Amidst the chaos, Darth Vader descended into the heart of the battlefield. His objective was clear: to confront Thor directly and test whether the Thunder God's combination of might and Force mastery could withstand the full fury of the dark side. Thor anticipated the move, standing on the surface of Coronet City's orbital ring, lightning dancing across his armor as he drew in the currents of the Force to enhance both agility and perception. Vader emerged from a shroud of shadows, his crimson blade ignited. his presence a dark pillar in the storm of battle. The two figures, icons of their respective universes, faced each other with a tension that resonated across the galaxy. Their duel was cataclysmic. Thor's strikes, augmented by the Force, met Vader's precise lightsaber attacks, each blow reverberating across the orbital ring. Force pushes collided with bursts of lightning. Mjolnir deflected energy slashes with a symphonic clash of power. Yet this was more than physical combat, it was a clash of philosophies. Vader sought to dominate, to coerce Thor into submission or destruction, using fear and anger as weapons. Thor, however, moved with restraint, countering with techniques that preserved life while neutralizing immediate threats. Each decision, each deflection, carried moral weight. The battlefield itself became a canvas for Thor's growing understanding of responsibility and influence. The duel's turning point arrived when Vader unleashed a Force storm of unprecedented intensity, one designed to overwhelm even the most resilient opponent. Thor, drawing deeply from his hybrid connection to the Force, responded with a counterconductive energy surge, Mjolnir acting as both conduit and amplifier. Lightning fused with the Force, creating arcs of raw energy that tore through the vacuum of space and disrupted the Dark Lord's assault. In a moment of clarity, Thor realized that brute strength would not decide this confrontation. The battle's outcome depended on perception, timing, and the courage to act decisively yet ethically. He channeled the Force to anticipate Vader's next move, weaving together telekinesis, lightning, and Asgardian combat technique in a seamless defense and offense that shifted the momentum irrevocably. At the climax of the battle, Thor faced a moral and strategic dilemma. Vader, recognizing Thor's restraint as both a strength and a limitation, attempted a psychological maneuver. A Force-induced vision of worlds destroyed by hesitation, of allies lost through mercy, and a victory unattainable without embracing anger. Thor's connection to the Force allowed him to see through the illusion, distinguishing manipulation from reality. In this moment, Thor's growth was evident. He chose not to succumb to fear or rage, instead relying on clarity, empathy, and strategic foresight to neutralize Vader without lethal measures. Using a combination of Force-enhanced speed and precision, Thor disarmed the Sith Lord, redirecting his lightsaber strikes harmlessly into the vacuum while creating an energy barrier that prevented immediate retaliation. The Imperial fleet, observing Vader's defeat, hesitated. Thor's tactical brilliance, combined with the coordinated efforts of his allies, had demonstrated an unassailable advantage, not merely in raw power, but in strategic execution and moral authority. Rather than capitalizing on complete destruction, Thor issued terms: withdrawal for Imperial forces in exchange for non-interference with independent systems and the protection of civilian populations. Vader, unwilling to concede outright, but unable to overcome Thor's combination of power and foresight, acquiesced temporarily, retreating to reassess and plan. The confrontation had reshaped not just the battlefield, but the strategic calculus of every faction within the galaxy. Thor's influence extended beyond the immediate battle. Rebel leaders, Mandalorian clans, and neutral systems recognized the emergence of a new kind of power, one that balanced might with moral clarity, strategy with empathy, and cosmic strength with disciplined restraint. Thor had become not merely a warrior, but a symbol of possibility, that power could be exercised responsibly, that alliances could be forged across ideological divides, and that ethical action could achieve outcomes previously deemed impossible. Systems that had been on the brink of surrender now found hope, while those long under Imperial subjugation reconsidered their positions. Thor's presence had altered the galaxy's narrative arc in ways no single faction could ignore. Even as the battle concluded, Thor knew the confrontation with Vader represented only one phase of the larger conflict. The Empire remained formidable, and the galaxy's future uncertain. Yet he had proven that careful judgment, strategic acumen, and a deep understanding of both the Force and Asgardian power could influence events at the highest levels. He had learned to integrate his abilities in a way that respected both the ethical demands of leadership and the practical realities of warfare in a galaxy defined by extremes. Thor had arrived as an outsider, a god displaced, yet he was now an architect of change, shaping alliances, inspiring hope, and redefining what it meant to wield power responsibly. As Thor withdrew from Corellia's orbit, the aftermath of battle left both opportunity and tension in its wake. Imperial forces were regrouping, but their morale had faltered. Rogue Jedi and Mandalorian allies looked to Thor for guidance, recognizing a leadership that transcended traditional hierarchies. Political emissaries from independent systems arrived, seeking counsel and support. Thor's philosophy, now tested in the crucible of galactic-scale conflict, would guide not only the immediate reconstruction, but also the long-term shaping of alliances, governance, and the exercise of Force-influence power. The stage was set for new chapters in the galaxy's history, chapters defined by collaboration, moral courage, and the careful blending of strength and restraint. Thor had transformed from a displaced god into a galactic strategist, philosopher-warrior, and emblem of ethical might. The confrontation with Vader, while climactic, served not as an endpoint, but as a catalyst, revealing the intricate interplay between power, morality, and foresight in a galaxy perpetually at the brink of conflict. Thor had proven that even in a universe dominated by extremes, light versus dark, rebellion versus empire, a being from beyond the stars could influence events profoundly without compromising principles or causing indiscriminate destruction. Thor's journey had reached a pinnacle of influence, yet the galaxy's challenges were far from over. The lessons of Corellia, Mustafar, and Sullust would shape his decisions moving forward, informing interactions with both allies and adversaries, and establishing a precedent for power exercised with responsibility. His legend would inspire hope, provoke fear, and provoke debate, proof that a god from another universe could leave an indelible mark on the Star Wars galaxy. The smoke of battle had finally cleared, though not entirely. The Corellian shipyards were scarred, some orbital platforms reduced to skeletal frameworks, but the city below remained largely intact. Thor hovered in low orbit, Mjolnir at his side, surveying the battlefield with a mixture of relief and solemnity. The galaxy, though shaken, had endured, and Thor's choices had made the difference. Yet he knew that victory was only the beginning. The consequences of his presence and actions would reverberate through every sector, every faction, and every being who had witnessed his fusion of Asgardian might and Force mastery. Allies and factions began to regroup. The Mandalorian clans, who had initially approached with caution, now sought Thor's counsel openly. Their chieftains, once skeptical of an outsider wielding power that even the most skilled warriors could not match, acknowledged the strategic precision and moral clarity he had displayed. They saw in him not just a formidable warrior, but a leader who respected autonomy and honor, principles aligned with Mandalorian culture. Some even offered oaths of alliance, while others preferred loose cooperation, a testament to Thor's influence without coercion, a rare feat in a galaxy dominated by strict hierarchies and ruthless power plays. The rogue Jedi, who had fought alongside him, also approached. They were wary of the hybrid approach he embodied, technology and magic from another universe fused with the mystical currents of the Force. But Thor's actions had earned their respect. Some had initially questioned whether his lack of traditional Jedi training might be a liability, yet the tactical brilliance, combined with an instinctive understanding of the Force, proved him a master strategist and a capable guide. Jedi teachings, they realized, were not the only path to wisdom. A being with different origins could interpret the Force in ways that challenged orthodoxy and inspired growth. Meanwhile, the Rebel Alliance had sent envoys to assess the broader implications of Thor's intervention. Leia Organa, her calm yet steely demeanor unshaken even after witnessing intergalactic chaos, met with Thor personally. She understood the potential impact of his arrival, not merely as a combatant who could sway battles, but as a symbol that the galaxy could bend toward hope without succumbing to tyranny. Thor listened attentively, recognizing that his role could not be limited to sporadic heroics. He was now part of the galaxy's evolving narrative. Discussions began about coordination, about sharing intelligence, and about building a network that combined rebel tenacity, Mandalorian resilience, rogue Jedi insight, and Thor's own unique abilities. Yet even as alliances solidified, challenges persisted. The Empire, humiliated by its loss yet far from defeated, had already begun covert operations to regroup. Darth Vader, in particular, retreated not in submission, but in contemplation, calculating how to counter Thor's influence in the future. Thor, attuned to the Force and aware of Vader's persistent presence, realized that the confrontation had shifted their dynamic from adversary versus intruder to a more nuanced contest, one of philosophy, strategic foresight, and psychological endurance. Every movement of Imperial forces would now be interpreted through the lens of Thor's experience, every action scrutinized, every potential threat measured against both Asgardian might and Force-derived insight. The aftermath on Corellia was equally complex. Civilians, though largely unharmed thanks to Thor's restraint, were confused and fearful. Ships rained down from orbit, Mandalorians landed with precision, and rogue Jedi moved through the streets to ensure safety. The presence of a god-like being manipulating forces beyond conventional understanding prompted both awe and terror. Thor took the time to meet with planetary leaders, explaining his interventions and offering guidance for rebuilding infrastructure. His diplomatic efforts reinforced the perception that power could be wielded responsibly, that strength need not equate to oppression, and that moral decision-making could coexist with decisive action in wartime conditions. Thor's internal growth during this campaign was equally profound. Months of navigating the Star Wars galaxy had forced him to confront questions of authority, morality, and the consequences of unchecked power. He had learned that even a god from another universe could be fallible, that wisdom and restraint were as critical as raw strength, and that alliances required negotiation, empathy, and trust. His mastery of the Force, while initially tactical, had evolved into a tool for philosophical exploration. He began to understand how the currents of the galaxy intertwined with the destinies of individuals and factions alike, and how intervention carried responsibilities beyond immediate survival or tactical advantage. One particularly delicate challenge arose when Thor encountered systems teetering on the edge of Imperial occupation, but reluctant to ally with the rebels. The inhabitants, wary of outsiders and desperate for autonomy, required not just protection, but reassurance that their independence would be respected. Thor applied his hybrid approach, a display of strategic might to dissuade Imperial aggression, combined with negotiation and cultural sensitivity to ensure local leadership retained authority. By demonstrating strength without domination, he reinforced the possibility that a galaxy under threat need not sacrifice liberty in exchange for survival. Such interventions became case studies for interfactional cooperation, emphasizing ethical influence as much as military prowess. Even the criminal underworld took notice. Huts and independent syndicates, typically profit-driven and opportunistic, recognized that Thor was a variable beyond simple exploitation. His actions on Corellia disrupted certain smuggling routes and supply chains, but also protected others who adhered to moral codes or neutrality. Syndicate leaders, intrigued by his philosophy, sent emissaries to gauge potential collaboration or negotiation. Thor, ever principled, accepted dialogue but rejected coercion or exploitation, demonstrating that even in a morally gray sector, ethical power could redefine traditional dynamics. As the galaxy's factions recalibrated, Thor also addressed the question of his own presence. Though he had arrived by accident, torn from Asgard through dimensional rift and hyperspace anomaly, he now had a choice. He could return home, or he could remain, continuing to shape the galaxy's evolving story. The decision weighed heavily. His sense of duty to Asgard pulled him outward, but the responsibilities and connections he had forged in the Star Wars galaxy anchored him in place. Ultimately, he chose a middle path, remaining present but autonomous, ready to intervene when moral and strategic imperatives demanded, while preserving his freedom to depart or act independently as circumstances evolved. The galaxy, through Thor's interventions, had witnessed a new paradigm of power. Battles were fought not solely through fear, domination, or brute force, but through foresight, moral clarity, and strategic coordination. Thor had demonstrated that strength could coexist with ethics, that alliances could be fluid yet principled, and that even a being from an entirely different universe could find purpose in guiding, protecting, and inspiring those around him. His impact would resonate for decades. Political factions recalibrated strategies. The Rebel Alliance gained not just a powerful ally, but a philosophical model for leadership. And neutral systems saw hope where once there was only fear. Yet the story was not over. Even as Thor departed Corellia's orbit, the Empire's remnants began reconsolidating. Vader's shadow loomed, and the galaxy's underlying tensions remained. Thor's presence had altered trajectories, but it had also introduced new questions. Could the galaxy sustain ethical leadership in the face of constant conflict? Would other outsiders appear, further complicating the delicate balance? How would the Force itself respond to this unprecedented blend of Asgardian might and Jedi mastery? Thor understood that his journey was far from complete, that the lessons of this galaxy were ongoing, and that his influence, while profound, was a catalyst rather than a permanent solution. Thor meditated on the orbital platform, lightning dimmed but ever present, Force currents flowing in harmony with his thoughts. He contemplated the lives saved, the battles fought, and the alliances forged. For the first time in millennia, he felt a deeper connection not just to power, but to consequence, philosophy, and stewardship. The Star Wars galaxy, a place of endless conflict and moral ambiguity, had taught him lessons that Asgard had never required: patience, strategic humility, and the art of measured intervention. He realized that even gods could learn, adapt, and grow when confronted with forces and societies fundamentally different from their own. The galaxy entered a new status quo. Thor remained a beacon of potential, a being whose abilities transcended conventional classifications, whose presence had shifted strategic landscapes, and whose philosophy offered a new model of intervention. Systems, factions, and leaders were left to interpret and respond to his actions, creating ripples that would extend far beyond immediate victories. Thor, in turn, embraced a future of vigilance, ethical decision-making, and prepared intervention, fully aware that his role as a hybrid Force warrior would continue to shape the galaxy for years to come. Through all these events, one truth remained: power alone did not define influence. Strategy, morality, and the courage to act decisively while respecting life had created a legacy that neither Vader, the Empire, nor even Thor himself could have predicted. The galaxy had been touched by the lightning of a god and the currents of the Force, forever altered, and yet still resilient. A universe where ethical strength and strategic insight could triumph without the annihilation of entire worlds. Thor's story, though far from over, had reached a point of equilibrium. The galaxy would remember the god who trained in the ways of the Force, the outsider who reshaped the conflicts of the stars, and the leader who showed that morality and might could coexist in the most turbulent of times. And as Thor looked out at the expanse of stars, he felt a sense of purpose and belonging that bridged not just galaxies, but universes, a testament to what one being, fully committed to principle and power, could achieve. Thor's journey through the Star Wars galaxy had changed everything, not just for him, but for every system, faction, and individual touched by his presence. He had arrived as a god from another universe, wielding Mjolnir with Asgardian might, yet it was his mastery of the Force, his wisdom, and his moral clarity that reshaped battles, alliances, and philosophies across the stars. The Mandalorians had found respect for honor tempered with diplomacy. The rebels had gained a strategic and philosophical model for leadership, and even rogue Jedi had reconsidered the rigid doctrines that had defined their order for centuries. The galaxy would never see another being like him. His presence blurred the line between God and Force user, power and responsibility, intervention and autonomy. Imperial forces, though temporarily thwarted, now faced the knowledge that strength alone could not guarantee control. Morality and strategy mattered as much as fear and weapons. And Thor himself emerged transformed, humbled by the complexity of the Force, enlightened by the multiplicity of perspectives, and committed to acting as a guardian not through domination, but through principle. In the end, the story of Thor in this galaxy was a testament to potential, of what can happen when power meets wisdom, when might meets morality, and when worlds collide across time and space. The legend would live on, inspiring hope, courage, and the understanding that even the smallest choice can echo across the stars.